And just talking about migrants, then you have a migrant background as well, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, I came here when I was two, hence why I have such a bogan Aussie accent.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we immigrated here when I was two. Um, so I don't remember heaps about Sri Lanka, where I'm from, but I've been
Mm.
back several times. And yeah, well and truly Aussified now. So yeah, but still very much grew up in that sort of migrant world of one foot in one world, one foot in another. So
Yeah, 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 that's right. And that's a bit of a weird experience in itself, isn't it? You know,
yeah, exactly. I saw someone explain it. It's like, you're like Sri Lankan in your house and then you're Aussie, like you'll be like talking a certain way at home and then you walk out the door and be like, g'day, like you just like switch kind of like what code switching or something, I think people call it. So yeah, lots of that.
yeah, that's very fair. And I know I think we've touched on this a bit before, but I would really like to know how you got into psychology and what was the decision for you to become a psychologist? How did you become a psychologist?
I really wish I had a great story, but here's the funny, like the weird story. I didn't know what I wanted to do at the end of school. And I was one of those cliched people that found people interesting,
Yeah,
but I didn't know how that could become a job. So I read we used to have this thing called a job guide. It was like this
yeah,
boring book about that big, just A to Z jobs. And I read
yeah.
the entire thing. And probably the only two jobs I could really see that I wanted to do was anthropologist or psychologist. And I looked into anthropology and I just realized there's no real jobs there. Like, at least that's what I thought at the time.
Yeah.
So I studied psychology and thankfully, I liked the degree, even though once I got out of the degree and did the work, I was like, oh, this is different. But I liked both. So I liked the degree. I didn't mind the science aspect of things. Didn't like statistics like a lot of psychologists, but got through it.
Yeah.
And then got out, got an internship, and went, oh, this is different, but enjoyed that as well. So I would love to pretend it was all predestined or something like that, but it was kind of a fluke, I think. I think you're very lucky if your first choice works out in any
Interesting.
career. So
But I think you going through the book, it's such a psychologist thing to do. Yeah. Just going into just analyzing the whole thing, intellectualizing everything, and
yeah.
then okay. That goes with my personality, I think.
Yeah. I think it's also an immigrant thing to want to make it work and make a good job and do a stable something. So I knew I wasn't going to be the kind of person that finished school and just enjoyed and went and worked a nice whatever job and traveled or something like that. I kind of wish I did, but I wanted to find a stable career, and
Yeah.
psychologist seemed like the one to go for. So
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that's very interesting. So actually the reason I've invited you on this podcast is because you've helped me in the past just understanding the early psych process, like the whole how to navigate it, which is very different than what I think I experienced even during my internship. And I
right,
think, yeah, and I think like it is absolutely important for, I'm hoping, other early career psychs like me to just have the chance to just listen to your insight, because there's so much that is not spoken about, or it's not normal, not common to hear, and we really need to
yeah,
through the experience. So this is my hope that when there's one early career site that I could help through this podcast, I think that would be really good.
yeah, that's great. I mean, I think there's definitely um, a whole bunch of people out there that feel that way, where you finish uni thinking that being a psychologist is going to be a very
Mm,
straightforward. There's some sort
mm,
of manual out there you can grab and be like, this is how to be a psychologist. And then you get out there and you go, oh, wow, there is
yeah,
so many different areas of psychology. There are so many different ways of working. And your internship kind of is very structured too. But then when you come out of
yeah,
that, you're like, yes, I get my freedom. But on the other side of the freedom is also anxiety about, oh, what if I'm doing it wrong? What if this is not the way to do things? What am I meant to do? So, yeah, I started writing on LinkedIn about early
mm,
career psych experiences like maybe a year or two ago. I can't remember exactly.
yeah,
Not thinking much of it, thinking of let's put some of these ideas out there because I'm hearing it so much in supervision with early career psych, and then getting people actually were like, oh, messaging me saying, oh wow, it's the first time someone's written that like in that way, and I was
yeah,
like, oh yeah, of course. Like I kind of forgot that we just learned this stuff the hard way, a lot of us. So, or we learned it via each other. That we. That's why I'm such a big believer in supervision. Is there's some things you have to talk to another psych about. You can only get it from another psych. So
Yeah. That's so
yeah,
true. And I think like just knowing that I have like this steady supervisor that I can book my appointments with, it's such a psychological safety net,
yeah, yeah. I know what you
right?
mean. Yeah, yeah. And actually, to be honest, I always say this, tell this to people is like, knock me or anyone else down off the pedestal because we do this as well. Like I literally had supervision today. So
Yeah.
I need to have someone that I'm like, all right, I need to talk. It's booked in, or just peers that I can call or just talk to in my lunch breaks or whatever, just to go. Oh, I'm dealing with this. I need to talk to you about something. Yeah, it is definitely a safety net. It's that knowing that you can go to someone and be like, hey, I don't understand what this means. What does this mean?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So before we jump into the podcast, I'll just quickly go through the topics you're going to cover. So the first one is developing your best practice. I think we just almost started touching on that. And that's I'll be asking questions, then we'll be answering them mainly. And then the other one is responsibility as a psychologist, but more so from, I guess, from a very just your self perspective, right? Not no more so about clients in the sense that we're not talking about clients, we're talking about how to be a psychologist, what's my responsibility in that. The next one is burnout, and this is overworking the problem. That's the third topic. And the fourth one is finding your feet in the industry, which I think is very important and looks very unique to everybody.
Yeah.
But let's start with the first, and we've already started a bit around there, but developing your best practice, right? How did you start identifying what your best practice look like?
Well, I think when you first come out of uni and you're doing the internship, like a lot of people are just hungry to learn, right? They will
Yeah.
learn anything. And I was one of those people. I would just, if I could pick someone's brain, I would go and do it. And
Mm,
what that involved was a lot of mimicking to begin with, which is there's nothing
mm,
wrong with that, right? You
mm,
you
mm,
you mimic other people's ways of doing things. But I started to notice that on some level, I wasn't acting like me. Like I was trying to like put on a bit of a front of like what a psychologist should be. So I think developing your best practice is how do you do the things that are evidence based and ethical, but it's still you. It's congruent with you. It's
mm,
all of that sort of stuff that initially feels like really odd and clunky.
mm,
But when you kind of when you can inhabit like this space of working authentically, to use a buzzword, um, clients will feel it, and you will feel it too. You'll feel like far less resistance. You'll feel much better. It doesn't sort of like feel as robotic when you go through the sessions. So for me, that involved a lot of supervision, workshops and things like that, but then a lot of reflection. I think you develop your best practice by reflecting. You can kind of sum it up by like you learn something, you go and test it, then you reflect on it with usually a peer or a supervisor or by yourself, and then you go back and experiment. So that process over and over again, I think, is how you develop your best practice. And you can apply that really simply by doing things like, learning from a supervisor or a workshop. What I'll do is I'll learn from a supervisor. I'll say, like, how would you word that? And they'll word it the way they do. Take that down, and then I'll change that into my own way of sort of talking it. Same principles, but my language, my way of doing it. So it feels congruent when it comes out of my mouth in the therapy sessions or when I'm boundary setting or something like that.
that's right. So how did you make the transition from mimicking, which is I think that's exactly how I felt as well. It's like there's this set way of being,
Yeah,
which yeah, to some extent there is, but also it's so important to feel comfortable because at the end of the day we're working with human beings,
yeah,
right?
that's right.
So how did you like start embodying your authentic self? Like, what did you notice some of the things you're doing differently?
Well, I think it's important to note it's a gradual thing, right? Like
Yeah,
even now, I'm still working on that. If you want to be
yeah,
honest about it, there's still times when I go, "Oh, I'm not comfortable doing this. I've got to figure out my way of doing it." And if it's a boundary setting, something that's difficult.
yeah.
Um, but I think the things I started to notice was like questioning the things that I thought were important in therapy, or just as a psychologist, not just therapy, because you could be doing this in case management or assessments or whatever.
Yeah.
It's really important, I think, to look at what are you actually trying to do in your work as a psychologist. So sometimes what we'll do is maybe you take some really superficial stuff. Like I used to dress up a little bit when I first started. I wanted to make myself look a bit older. I was like 23. When your clients are 50, you're trying to not look like a baby-faced, kid to them, right? So it was just like looking around at that sort of stuff and analyzing it and going, am I like, is that necessary? Is it necessary to wear a button-up shirt tucked in, blah, 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 blah? Is it necessary to talk in a particular way? Or is that something I'm bringing into the sessions, not the client? Like they're not looking for that. I'm just assuming they're looking for that. So it's looking and adjusting, just analyzing some of that stuff. And then noting moments like where things went well in therapy. So sometimes you go, that was things really went well when I was just really honest with the client and said, "Can I be honest with you? I just think that's a really bad idea." And it feels like it broke the script, but the client really appreciated it. And it's when you're doing that reflection to go, actually, that might be there might be something there, right? So it's stuff like that I started to notice. It's like sometimes when I was more casual and I talked more casually to clients, because I talk casually in my rest of my life, more conversationally, I noticed that I was getting through to them more. And I was
Mm.
watching my colleagues and noticing that too. I started in an Aboriginal medical service. And one of the best things that I experienced early on was that I worked with people from all different professions. So I was the only psychologist for ages, and my supervisors were external.
Mm.
So I was working with Aboriginal health workers, I was working with doctors, nurses, I was working with other organizations. And I would actually watch them and go, how do they engage clients? How come they've got such great rapport with the clients? And what I was noticing, one of the first things I was noticing was lots of like just talking with their clients, just talking, like just being able to have a conversation. Whereas I know how to have a conversation, but when I went psychologist mode, all of a sudden I was there with my yellow legal pad, like, and tell me how you feel, and tell me about your week, and blah 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 blah. And I started to experiment with that sort of stuff and go, what if I put the legal pad down and I can just talk to the client? If I really need to write something, I can. So I just started experimenting with stuff like that. And then I started to realize, well, I feel more comfortable. And also the client seems to feel more comfortable. And just as importantly, or more importantly, the outcomes seem to be better. They're starting to talk about things in therapy that we want to talk about. There's less resistance, all this sort of stuff I started noticing. So that's where, if you're doing the self-reflection well, you'll start to pick up on stuff like that. You can basically just do it by going, okay, what went well in the session? What didn't go well? And then what did I do to contribute to that? And what did the client do to contribute to that, for both of those things? If you just do that as a reflection, you'll start to pick up on things that, you realize, oh, some of the stuff that I was doing before is just not necessary. It was just what I thought a psychologist must do.
That's so fascinating. And I like that, that assuming that this is what the client's needs versus what does the client actually need.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I think we were talking before, but this is something that stuck with me is that our clients are also doing the work,
Yeah,
which I think
absolutely.
tell me a bit more about that because I think it's very good. It's a really good way to put it in one sentence.
Yeah, because I think one of the ways to take pressure off yourself as a psychologist, you are not the guru. You're not here to just dispense wisdom. You are here to work collaboratively with your client. I think that's, for me, the most ethical and practical way to work with people. Um, and you've got to realize that the client contributes to that, and they're doing
Mm.
some work too. They had to turn up, they had to make time, they had to do the homework if they do the homework. They have to figure out how to let you in and what to tell you and all those sorts of things as well. If you've ever been for therapy yourself, you can just instantly just understand how that works by just reflecting on your own experience, being on the other side of the equation. But when we realize that, then to me, it's even more important to be collaborative with clients. To give them credit for what they're doing. We're not doing everything. We're not doing necessarily even doing the heavy lifting. The client might be doing the heavy lifting at times. So
Yeah.
it's just a way to sort of respect the client, but also to be practical and um, reinforce the things they're doing too. Like if a client's really honest with me, I'll be like, by the way, thanks for being really honest. I can't imagine that was easy. I really
Mm.
want to acknowledge that stuff because it is absolutely a collaboration. It's not a psychologist like, holding all the burden of the session. It's the client too.
That's right. And I think that's where the second topic comes in with the responsibility of the psych, right? How do you think, why do you think we have this so much dissonance in this space where, and I've really observed that with few of my sort of peers as well, that it's like, "Ah, I need to know, I need to be able to fix, I need,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's multi-layered. There'd probably be like quite a few answers to that, but one of the main ones is that, we went from high school to university to these learning environments where it kind of makes sense that you learn in these kind of like structured, maybe rigid is a word too you could use ways. And then you come out and you do the work and it's far more dynamic and complex. And I think what you're trying to do is like marry the two. But I thought you just did like CBT session one, you do this, session two, you do that, session three, you do this. That's what you thought was coming because of some of your university training, right? But then on top of that, I can understand why we retreat to that because it's uncomfortable to sit with the uncertainty and the
Mm,
ambiguity of the work, right? If I'm feeling uncomfortable, one way to sort of deal with that is to be able to intellectualize and go,
mm,
well, this neatly fits here and here and here and here. And then we have a diagnostic system that does that as well.
mm,
But as they say, the map is not the territory.
mm.
A lot of the work as a psychologist, you can write it down on paper. It doesn't really capture it, what the actual work is like. And that's why I'm so big on like, supporting psychs. And that's why I think we should talk to each other all the time because it really helps you can have like a one conversation with another psych that just can like explain or calm you down on something more than reading a book or going to a workshop or something does because again the map is not the territory. So
Yeah, it really normalizes the experience, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that. Yeah, that's right. It's a very rigid, straightforward process, and it's needed to get to the end of the journey because it's a long journey. But
Yeah.
I think once you get, yeah, it's very dynamic.
Hmm.
And that's right. And it's very complex. Like, you can use CBD, but it looks so different on two different types of clients,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah, and not to trash CBT, but it's like that was usually what people were sort of like taught at uni. It
Yeah.
was held on a pedestal, and the way it was
Mm.
presented, at least what I remember, was
Gold standard.
gold standard. But also, like you would hear about these cases where, like, session one looked like this, and session two, and
Mm-hmm.
because you're studying, you're like, oh, is that what it looked like? And some of us bought into that a little bit too much. I was young too, so I didn't have a lot of life experience. So I went, oh, great, so I'll just do this. It'll be really nice and neat. And then you get to the first session, and the client's like, you go, oh, tell me a bit about what's going on. They go, I don't know, and you go, oh, I don't know what to do now. So it's that adjustment. That's why obviously the internship's so important, the supervision's so important, the learning from each other is so important. Because a psychologist can go, yeah, that's pretty normal. And you go, oh, okay, I didn't stuff something up royally. This is the work.
Yeah, that's right. And but that's right. Even but in the internship as well, there's so much safety net. And then when you
Yeah.
become early careers, I guess it's another ball game, right? And I really overestimated myself in that sense. I thought like internship's done so much hard work. I'm not doing logbooks ever again.
Yeah.
And then that was such a misconception because
Yeah.
now I have my CPD log, I have my invoicing log, I have this log, that log.
Yeah.
You and it's like, okay, internship was actually preparing me on how to write logs for a reason,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you kind of I think we all, I mean, a lot of us have been through that moment of like, oh, there must be some plateau I get to rest on
Yeah, yeah,
once I
yeah.
finish the internship. And then you get there and they're like, no, 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 there's more. And you go, oh, but having said that, I think um, when you have the right support and the right peers and
Yeah.
things like that, they will have that conversation with you straight away and be like, hey, yeah, we get it. We've been there. Here's what to do.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, I definitely didn't have that. So it was a big shock for me. But I think what I think what you were talking about before was something we touched on in the previous meeting, which was like the art and the science between the two, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Like I think that's one of the things a lot of people enjoy the art of it.
Yeah,
Well, some people, I mean, I like the science too, but if you can enjoy both, you're going to enjoy the industry, the work a bit more.
yeah.
But there is that element to it, right? Is like the evidence base points us in a direction,
Mm,
but we kind of flesh it out with the art of the therapy. Like, if I'm just keep using therapy as an example, but even if it wasn't, the art is all those little things that you learn from each other. Like, here's how I would talk to a client when they're really upset. Here's how I would manage a stakeholder. Here's how to handle a meeting with, the doctor and the psychiatrist. And that's the kind of art of it. You can't go to find some study or, some sort of guidebook on that sort of stuff. You kind of learn that on the job, and
mm.
that like, constantly moving between shifting gears between the art and sciences um, is kind of interesting. And for some people, it's frustrating, but it is just a part of the job.
That's right. Yeah, interesting. And I think that would also come into getting yourself off the pedestal in the session in itself, isn't it? Because the art is it's being able to connect, is being able to be a good active listener, just being
Yeah.
present in the session. I think that's one of the
Mm.
biggest thing, and that requires, I guess, getting off the pedestal to some extent. But it's difficult to do that because there's
Yeah.
so much responsibility in that. It's so much assumed responsibility and presumed responsibility for that matter, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you were to look at a successful session, sometimes it might look
Mm,
like not much is happening.
mm,
If you're doing a really good job of listening,
mm.
active listening, you are like feeding back and things like that. But sometimes in your head, you're also going, am I doing enough? Like, is this
Yeah.
enough? Because I'm just kind of just sitting here. But then when you ask the client, it's like, oh, no, that was great. That's what happened to my very first client. I remember just freaking out because I was 23, he was 50, and he described himself as an alcoholic, told me other psychologists he'd seen. None of it worked. So I'm just sitting there going, oh, what am I going to do with this guy? So I just listened out of like fear. And I was like, this is all I've got. And I was sure he was going to get up at the end of the session and say, mate, what a waste of time. And he got up and
Yeah.
said, no, thanks. It's really nice to have someone listen for once. And I was like pretending like, yeah, that was my plan all along. But sometimes a successful session, the art of it is actually you kind of do less than you think you need to do.
Interesting. Yeah, that's right. And that's why, I think that's what you're talking about. Overworking the problems. Do not overwork the problems, isn't it?
Yeah, there's definitely a an element of that I think that comes from things like imposter syndrome and
Yeah.
when you just don't know what you're doing sometimes. Like if you're out of your depth, you'll start overworking. We said this a lot with early career psychs when we talk about time management.
Yeah.
Also, like how long does it take you to do your notes and do you prep before sessions and da 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 and like sometimes what's happening is it's not a lack of like motivation or anything like that.
Mm.
I guess you could say it is a skills deficit in the sense that you learn to do that stuff differently, but it often comes down to like overworking things. So people sometimes tell me they're prepping for like 20 minutes before the session. I go, cool. How much of that 20 minutes of prepping was used in the session? And sometimes they say, I don't know. And I go, well, you got to check because sometimes you're going to do all this work before the session and it doesn't like it's almost just you dealing with your own anxiety about the session, which is fine. But just check that stuff because you might be overworking it. You might trying to squeeze in 5 different things into the session so you can write up your notes and go, I did psychology stuff today, uh, rather than doing one thing really well. And I
Mm.
think that's the kind of part of our stresses and our burnouts. We can like the stuff that leads to burnout that we can take some responsibility for is to look at it and go, yeah, how much of like what I'm feeling is me trying to live up to expectations I have of myself that are unrealistic or not based on good outcomes, just based on like this. I think this is what I'm meant to do. I'm meant to really over prepare and have all these things lined up just in case the client wants to know about this. I've got it ready to be able to kind of like come to terms with that and consult the client a bit more. and be a bit more comfortable with rolling with things a little bit